Well, we're recording this on October 9th. We're releasing it on October 10th. Just 3 days later, Chris, October 13th, your hero, Mike Madigan, goes to prison. How you doing over there, buddy?
I'm more excited for Columbus Day, Colin, which once again, I will not have off this year.
Yeah, we don't give time off for any holidays, let alone, holidays that matter to Chris. But you're doing okay? You're fine with Madigan going to prison?
Judging from how long the rest of the machine guys who have gone down have been spending in jail, he'll be out in like 6 months. So whatever.
All right, Michael. Yeah, it seems like you're having some influence on Chris. Maybe you're finally getting him to see the light a little bit.
Yeah, well, can you imagine if it was Madigan as our speaker right now instead of Chris Welch? We'd be singing a very different tune.
In some ways bad, in some ways Chris seems to think good, but who knows? Alternate timelines. All right, well, we'll count that as our introduction of Michael and Chris. They've both already started to disappoint us. Maybe going to be another sleepy week from Michael and Chris, or maybe they'll wake up halfway through the episode.
I thought I've
Good.
been doing better lately, Colin.
You have, but here, I mean, that was pretty lame, man, for an introduction.
That's not even on the agenda. All right.
Oh.
So kind of throwing me a curveball right out of the gate. Colin, I've been in front of people at the doors for like nonstop for like the last like 84 hours.
Doesn't that require thinking
okay?
on your feet a little bit?
The only words I know how to say right now are hi, my name's Chris. I'm a volunteer going door to door to help Republicans get on the ballot for next year's election. Can we count on your petition to help them get on the ballot? Like, that's all I've been saying. So forgive me.
Can I use your bathroom?
If I'm going a little bit slow.
All right. Well, we're getting past the belly aching from Chris. Apparently, the 7 signatures he's contributed are a lot of hard work for him.
More than you.
Let's introduce our experts who have joined us before they say, why are we here? We've got State Senator Chris Balkema from the 53rd District. He's been with us before, also served on the Grundy County Board previously, where he was chairman. And he's a businessman. He's has a lot of experience in leadership and business. Chris, glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm going to try to do really well calling you Balkema this episode so that you and Jackowiak don't have to wonder who the heck we're talking about.
Just call him Senator, because we know Chris will
There we
never
go.
reach that level.
There we go. Michael bringing the heat.
God.
Well done, Michael. All right, Senator and Chris. I like it. We also have with us former McHenry County State's Attorney Patrick Kenneally, who is currently an attorney. And Patrick, what's going on, man? Glad to have you back.
Nothing much, just childcare and work. That's it.
There you go. Well, how many kids now? 14, 18, 22?
Now there's 4 that I know of. 4.
By the end of this episode, it'll be 5.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
Somebody send Colleen some help, the poor woman.
Yeah, oh yeah. Send her some wine.
Yeah, exactly. I think Abby will take care of that. All right, let's get into our first topic, which is probably going to require plenty of alcohol to get through. We'll be on this one for a bit. Let's talk about Chicago. Let's talk about federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, crime, immigration. It all just sort of comes together in one cluster of a topic. Anybody who watches these episodes knows that since last week, because we do these episodes once a week, the Trump has called up the National Guard, both from Illinois and from Texas. We have all sorts of developments in the city. You've got Pritzker even. Chris, I'm going to be curious your thoughts on this. Pritzker calling up or sending up some of the state law enforcement to establish some sort of a command center and get involved. I was very curious about that as to why he did it and why he did it so late. So there's a lot going on here. There's specific areas of this I'd like to cover, which I'm sure you'll all have a lot of thoughts on, but let's just start with this sort of broad. Anybody have any broad thoughts on this, initial thoughts on this before we get into like specifics? We're going to talk about, the violence against law enforcement that we've been seeing, the violent rhetoric and the lies that the left has been saying about the situation. We'll talk about this back and forth between Trump and Brandon Johnson and JB Pritzker about who should or shouldn't be in jail. We'll talk about weapons and the high level of weapons in Chicago. Both sides seem to want this fight, how Republicans should be messaging this. So those are the different dot points we're going to hit throughout. But if you've got any initial thoughts, now's your chance. Jump on in. Nobody wants to fight each other for the first comment.
I mean, I think that, there's a lot of problems in Chicago. We're all aware of it. We see, the crime statistics. We see the, nightly news of 50-something people got shot this weekend. And it's just, weekend after weekend after weekend. And this should be an opportunity for both sides to come together and do something about it. And there's an opportunity for resources at the federal level. But Pritzker wants to, put himself, I mean, he's basically said it verbatim that he wants to put himself between, law enforcement and those that have committed crimes. And then we wonder why people, react to law enforcement being in their communities the way that they do. Like it makes
Michael, doesn't this give you the sense of the kind of situation where, like, if you just took politics all the way out of it and ambition all the way out of it, like the adults could just sit down around a table and be like, "Hey, here's how we're going to work together to keep people safe." Like, isn't it like if you just remove all the politics from this, there actually is some good that could be done. But of course, we don't live in that kind of a world. I understand.
well,
But
the proof is in, last summer, whenever the DNC was in Chicago, and what does Pritzker do? He calls up and says, "Hey, we need some National Guard in here to keep everything safe." So when Pritzker's friends come to town, he wants to make sure everything's hunky dory. But then everyday Illinoisans have to deal with this nonsense on a daily basis: gang violence, people that are not citizens, that are people that are here illegally, that are committing crimes. Like you see some of the reports of who ICE is picking up in Chicago, and it's, child pornography, hit and run, DUI, assault, etc. These are not the people that we, want in our communities, want in our backyard. Gang affiliations, all sorts of stuff.
well, and I think the big thing here is, anybody else have initial thoughts before I get us rolling through the meat?
Well,
Let me get
I just,
Chris. Go ahead quickly.
I just wanted to kind of echo Butler's point, and I think the lack of cooperation it's making a lot of people less safe, because people, like, if you were coming into the city of Chicago and your goal was just to arrest the criminals and deport them, we could have been done by now. Frankly, we could have been done. We could have moved on to bigger things in politics. But you're putting the quote unquote innocent unquote undocumented people at risk here. You're making them less safe because you're not collaborating with ICE, you're not collaborating with federal law enforcement. So they're the ones who are getting wrapped up in this, but you don't actually care about them. The Democrats just care about getting themselves in the nightly news to try and get their play the roulette of the nightly news cycle so they get more national attention.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I don't think anybody who pays any attention to Illinois politics thinks that anything Pritzker or a lot of those in the party of unchecked power in Illinois do anything other than sort of consider how is what they say in response to what Trump is posting on Truth Media. How is their response going to do anything other than either further his political ambitions to be the president and his own pretensions of being the president versus not further it? I was watching just in preparation for this, where they have him outside the Daily Center, and they say, "Well, what would you like to say to the president with regard to Truth Social?" And in like the most canned, hackneyed way, he's talking to the reporter, and then he turns, and he practiced it like 6 times in the mirror. He's like, "If they want to they got to come through me first." And he's such a bad politician just because he's like the Carson Daly of politicians. He's just average in every possible way, like no panache, just no charisma whatsoever. And so it just came off as so tortured and so rehearsed. And it's not as, and you're like, this whole thing is allowing law enforcement agents, is allowing ICE agents who think exactly the same as Chicago Police Department officers, who have the same mindset, who know how to talk to each other, who know how to communicate with each other, syncing them up and not having Pritzker and everybody else right in the middle. But one of the things that I'd like to bring up is just, it's so curious that Pritzker is putting himself out as sort of the champion against executive authority when he shut down civic and commercial life in this state by Illinois. And I think that's why Trump can just have so much fun with Illinois Democrats, is because everything they're accusing him of doing, they've already done.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's jump into the big thing here that was the main sort of lead into this topic, which is the violence against federal law enforcement. And just the last week, we've seen just some ridiculous things. And you don't see most of this or hear about most of this. But this is just in the last week. You've got a gang member from the Latin Kings who offered a $10,000 bounty on the U.S. Border Patrol chief. You had two different individuals use their vehicles to strike federal agents and ram their vehicles in Chicago. You had an individual, Waukegan, who had been harassing and obstructing officers for months, who used her vehicle as a weapon to block an active investigation. You had a group of 10 vehicles box agents in, and then when the agents got out of the car, one of those vehicles tried to run them over, during which they called for help, and whoever was leading the patrol said Chicago police had to stand down. You see tires still being slashed, rocks and bricks still being thrown at officers. Fireworks are reportedly being shot off around them. Like, this is what's happening. And of course, what the left is doing is like running up, slapping you in the face, and then holding up the camera going, "Are you going to respond?" They go, look, see, they initiated violence. Like, that's the whole tactic here. It's juvenile, but that's what's happening. And there's a tremendous amount of escalation here. Like, this is just in the last week. What are we going to talk about on next week's episode? If it just keeps getting worse and worse. You saw, I didn't even mention this, but if you just flip through Twitter, you see story after story of, oh, look, that's ICE. Let's go bother them. And someone like drives up and cuts them off or tries to hit their vehicle. And that's not even in my list. Like, if this is where we are today, where are we going to be next week? Because we've made it okay to pursue violence against federal law enforcement. That's what the left has done here. This is only going to go somewhere bad.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna, so when you're thinking about and this whole thing shrouds the broader conversation, which is executive authority and whether or not Trump is acting prudently in sort of federalizing the National Guard, whether or not this does constitute an insurrection for purposes of the Insurrection Act. And the fact that Trump is carrying this out in Illinois, just to echo just the last point that I made, allows him to avoid the broader conversation as to whether or not this is an abuse of power. So yes, ICE is being harassed. Yes, people are doing the wrong thing. Yes, you have these groups of activists who are antagonizing ICE and making their jobs difficult. The broader question is whether or not ICE, pursuant to their federal authority to arrest people who are obstructing their ability to do their job, whether or not they actually need the National Guard in order to assist them because it's that bad, and whether or not we actually in Chicago want troops on the ground. Now, one of the things is that the city is so inept and the leadership is so bad, and there's so many people who are being killed and in danger, just to say what you were talking about, Michael, that it feels obvious. And a lot of times, I think reflexively, you want to say, like, yeah, get the troops in there and just stop it. But then you always have to ask the broader question, which is, think about President AOC with this power and what she's going to do with it. And so if we just say right now, like, yes, we think troops on the ground are a good idea, just remember, when the shoe's on the other foot, this is what they're going to use to justify the worst of their worst impulses.
Yeah, I think
that's the escalation of the politics behind it. And we always say, whatever you do, the next administration is going to take one step further. So you're just always got to be aware of that.
Yeah, and I think that, the Democrats really like to talk about, threats to democracy and things of that nature and threats to norms and those kind of things. But, at the end of the day, if you don't like what the president is doing, then, file a lawsuit. That's what the state of Illinois has done. The courts are going to decide if this is within his, scope of authority or not. And let it play out. You shouldn't be, encouraging people to, harass law enforcement or, get in their way or, God forbid, attack them like has been happening over the past couple of weeks because you disagree that Trump sent them here. Like, they're trying to do their job. They're doing what they've been told by the duly elected president of the United States. And if AOC or someone else becomes president in the future and does something that we don't like, then we take it to the court and the court will decide there too. We don't need to be, harassing, law enforcement or elected officials because we don't like what they're doing. It's not appropriate.
Not really a tactic you see much on the right, Michael? Like, at the end of the day, we're not out there throwing rocks because the other side did something we don't like. We're not burning down buildings, slashing tires, ramming our vehicles into people. I mean, it's just, you sort of know them by their actions, right? You just look at how each side is acting right now, and you're kind of like, okay, I do really feel like we're on the right side of history here because we're not running people over with our cars. Like, I think that there's just there's that factor too here. And we'll talk in a little bit about how, a lot of this from a political standpoint is a bit of a PR battle. And I think Republicans need to be aware of that. And we'll talk about that shortly. And in some areas, we're doing well in the PR battle, but in some areas, we're not. And we need to be honest about that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Well, and I think this is kind of the response that, you would expect from people when you have, Brandon Johnson comparing this to the Civil War, and this is the rise of the Confederacy, and the Republicans want a Civil War rematch in 2025. When you're using that kind of language and rhetoric, then people are going to have these adverse reactions that are not appropriate. And the media has to, they need to be pressing Brandon Johnson and Pritzker on some of this language and saying, I understand that they disagree with President Trump. That's fine. They have every right to do that. But some of the language that they're using is not good, and they need to be condemned for it. And the media needs to say, do you really think that it's appropriate to compare this to the Confederacy? Do you think that it's appropriate to compare Republicans and the President of the United States to, Nazi Germany and fascism and things we're not doing that to them. Even we didn't say those kind of, we didn't use that kind of rhetoric when Biden was president.
Yeah,
They don't need to be using it now.
Let's get on Reddit. Chris and Patrick, I want to let you guys go on this, but let's talk about Reddit for a second. Let me shift us to that, and let me lay the groundwork here. Michael was right. Let's talk about the violent rhetoric and the lies that have been told. I'll start with yours, Michael. Brandon Johnson saying that this is Republicans wanting to relitigate the Civil War and bring back the Confederacy. We got JB Pritzker saying that Trump has declared war on Chicago. This is an invasion of Illinois. He accused the president of treason. Said federal agents are using inhumane tactics. That they're the ones inciting tensions at the Broadview facility, which is an absolute lie. You have Juliana Stratton saying Trump is going into schools. That's a lie. Trump is going into houses of worship. That's a lie. You have JB Pritzker saying, well, this is a man in Trump who's suffering dementia. He doesn't read. He doesn't know anything that's up to date. You had Ayanna Pressley from the Squad saying, rogue ICE agents attacked an apartment complex in South Shore, Chicago, unlawfully terrorizing families in their own homes. There's 4 lies just in that one line. Young children were zip tied, which by the way, JB Pritzker and a bunch of other Democrats have echoed that line. 100% a lie. No children were zip tied, but they keep running with it, and the media lets them do it. Going back to Presley's tweet, homes were ransacked, which is a total lie. It's come out since that South Shore building had been failing building inspections all year for being dangerous and hazardous. I'm quoting from the inspections. There were numerous reports of squatters, gang activity, crime. There was a migrant who murdered another migrant in one of the building's apartments. And yet they're painting it as this was a peaceful neighborhood, a peaceful apartment, and then federal officers came in and just demolished the whole thing. Total lie. Go back to Brandon Johnson. He said these federal agents are breaking city law and should be charged with crimes. Go up to Lake County, where Democrats and their allies said that ICE is escalating their violent operations in the county. They're performing abductions across the county. This one's just a little tongue-in-cheek, but I got to add it. The CEO of the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture was very upset that the upcoming soccer match on Monday between Puerto Rico and Argentina was moved out of Chicago, and said that the decision is President Trump's attempt to impose economic sanctions on the city of Chicago for being a sanctuary city. The message is clear. Donald Trump is willing to punish entire communities to make a political point. Well, it turns out the truth is the match was moved by the promoter, not Trump, because there were very low ticket sales, so they had to move it somewhere else. This is where we're at. They're saying things, they're making things up. Chris has made this point. They'll say anything to try to win the news cycle. The reality is half of it is untrue, and most of it is a escalation of this violent rhetoric, and we wonder why law enforcement is being attacked. Go ahead, Chris. You were trying to jump in. Patrick.
I don't want to. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I was going to make the point of how the dangerous rhetoric is affecting people's daily lives, because there was an article I was reading, and I think it has more of a liberal bend, but I do think there's something that conservatives could use from it, is that you can't go down Cermak Road in the city of Chicago anymore, and it's dead. It's dead. Nobody's there. Nobody goes outside because the Democrats and the left are building up this narrative to the Hispanic community that these ICE agents are going door to door, just breaking down people's doors and taking people back to Mexico. So it's upending people's entire lives, and it's actually going to be hurting the economy long term because, Little Village is one of the economic powerhouses of the city of Chicago. That neighborhood drives the economy. Okay. So if you don't have people going outside because the media and the Democrats are telling them if you go outside, you're going to get snatched up by ICE, which isn't true, then yeah, there's going to be a hit from that. I was also disagreeing with Michael's point that Republicans don't do this. Republicans do this thing, do this. It's just that most of the time when the Republicans do this, it's more from like the activist crowd of the Republican Party. They're the ones who say things like Joe Biden's a Nazi. You never really hear it from like
I never saw that, Chris, and I'm connected to a lot of Republicans. But
Well,
I want to go back to your other point about the economic impact here, because I made this point a few weeks ago, and I took a lot of hit from a friend of mine in the media who I love, but was really unhappy with my point. But I stand by it, and I believe it's true that, yes, both sides here have done things wrong, and both sides have wanted this fight, and it's hurting real people. Okay, let's stipulate that. But the reality is that the left has been encouraging this fight, and they've been scaring communities for political gain. They've been pumping this up and scaring people about what's happening versus what is actually happening. And yeah, Chris, as a result, it's crickets. It's a ghost town in many communities because they're afraid. And it's the left that is actively trying to make them afraid for political gain, which I think, to me, is sickening, because at a certain point, politics has to stop. And if you're going to hurt kids, I shared a story a week or two ago about how, kids didn't want to go to school because they were afraid about ICE. It's like, okay, once you get to that point where you've made communities so afraid that kids won't even go to school, it's maybe time to rethink your life choices, because then you've taken it too far.
I mean, it's the same with the climate too. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of climate alarmism, but it's the whole idea that there's large swaths of our children that are suffering from such despair over climate change and otherwise. And it's all been driven not by anything that has to do with reality or their lived experience, but it's all just been driven by the fact that they've been doom scrolling up and down X or TikTok or whatever the case may be. And this is the same thing. Now, I would just disagree with the idea that there's sort of this one-sided overwrought hyperbole that's coming just from the Democrats. I mean, you had Trump during his entire campaign talking about how if he loses, the country's going to be destroyed. You have Elon Musk saying that the country will absolutely be destroyed if Trump, and wokeism. I mean, the whole framing of disaster from politicians if the other side gets any type of power is not something that is singularly applicable to the Democrats. If you and if the five of us, if I got on the train right now from my little perch in Crystal Lake and I went down to the city of Chicago on the Metro and I got off and I started walking around, no part of what I would think if I had just been living in a bubble would be that the city of Chicago is undergoing some type of insurrection. Like, there would be no experience that I would have walking around the loop or doing anything where it's an insurrection. So the fact that Trump has framed it as an insurrection and some type of existential threat to the country, and the fact that there's actually people that believe that, I think is just an example of the fact that everybody is doing it and it's not serving anybody. And the bottom line is the reason why Republicans aren't engaged in violence because of the hyperbolic language is because we're adults. We're not idiots. We understand what's going on. We don't actually believe it. Whereas I think there are a lot of people on the Democratic side who are young, immature, narcissistic, selfish, who really have this self-importance about them and who really feel as though they're in this sort of fight versus good and evil. And of course, if that's what your incentives are, and if you are framing things, if you actually do believe that we're on the brink of fascism, then of course any rational person would be incentivized to act in that way. I think the only difference is not between rhetoric, it's between who's receiving the messages and who has the maturity to put them in the proper context.
Yeah, Patrick, I appreciate your point, and I think my buddy's going to text me and say, look how smart you are and how dumb I am based on your comment. I'll simply say this. You brought up Trump, one person who said something that you said took things too far. In my quotes about all the different comments made by Democrats. I brought up a dozen, and I had dozens more I didn't share. I do think that while I would agree that both sides are to blame here, the amount of violent rhetoric, the amount of violent actions being pursued by the left is significantly higher than the amount on the right. This is like every time that we say on the left or on the right, we say, oh, look, the left's doing all these things. Like, well, January 6th. It's like, okay, how long are you going to say the one thing that we did? How long are you going to point to the one thing that we did when you've done dozens and dozens,
what do you mean? Are you
of
French,
things on your side?
We didn't do that. That wasn't us. We weren't there. Don't be French on me here, Collin.
And I agree with you, Chris, but I'm just saying, like, we keep doing this. Trump said X, so now 100 of us can go do this thing that's just as bad, if not worse. Like, I do reject a little bit that Patrick, that it's
Trump is the focal
sides.
point of the Republican Party, whereas I think the focal point of the Democratic Party is far more diffuse. So I think that that it takes 30 Democrats saying one thing to get the same attention as Trump gets through one tweet. And I just think that that's how both parties are structured at this point.
Yeah, okay, fair. All right, let's go to the next thing here. Speaking of what you just said there, Patrick, let's talk about this back and forth between Trump and Brandon Johnson and JB Pritzker. Trump said that Pritzker and Chicago's mayor should be in jail in I think it was a Truth Social post, I think it was. He said that in response to the situation where vehicles boxed in federal law enforcement and federal law enforcement called for help. And while the Chicago's top cop says that this is untrue, you've got the data, you've got the facts that the patrol leader, whatever his title is, and I'm purposely not using his name, I don't want to call him out, but he did say flat out that we're not going to help, that our officers are not going to be there, we're not going to assist. And so that was what Trump was responding to when he said that Chicago's mayor should be in jail for failing to protect those officers. Governor Pritzker also. And then, of course, there's the response. That's exactly what Pritzker and Johnson and all of them wanted. This is authoritarianism. They want to throw us in jail. I'm only going to quote my buddy John Gioccaris, who comments about this, because he's like, the clutching at pearls is really driving me crazy here. Because how many times has JB Pritzker called Donald Trump a felon? How many times has JB Pritzker said that Trump should be in prison, Trump should be in jail? Now Trump does it one time in a social media post that wasn't even serious. It's not an action of government. And suddenly we're all supposed to freak out. Like, listen, it's not right when either side does it, but I'm not going to feel bad for Pritzker and Johnson when they've been saying that Trump should be in jail for years now, and he just said it one time. I don't know. That's my feeling on this. Maybe one of you guys will disagree.
Oh, we're in Illinois. I thought Democrat politicians going to jail was like a badge of honor or something, or a rite of passage. They're all going there.
That's it. All right, I'll carry us on to the next one.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, it's just. I totally agree with you that that's what they want. That's what Pritzker's and Johnson's PR wanted. They wanted to be viewed as sort of the stalwart Robin Hoods that are standing between Hispanic and Polish and other types of illegal aliens and or their families and otherwise, and the federal government. I think the bottom line is most of these communities don't necessarily support it. And when Governor Pritzker says something to the effect of like, if they want to get to you, they have to come through me first. Well, they don't want to get to me. They don't want to get to anybody that I know or love. Who is it that he's standing between the federal government from? Trump is taking the eminently reasonable position that should have been taken 30 years ago, that if you come into this country illegally, the natural response is that we catch you and remove you. If any one of us went to another country and we didn't announce ourselves and we just sort of went into the country and they found us and they were like, hey, like, Kenneally, what are you doing? You've been here for 3 years. You got to go back to America. Nobody on this call would think to themselves, oh, I've suffered some kind of injustice. Like, what Trump is doing is eminently reasonable. And so Pritzker is saying, and so he's putting himself between what? All the blue-haired crazy people that are protesting outside of the Broadview facility, as well as all the illegal immigrants. He's not doing anything on behalf of people in Illinois. And just this whole idea that he gets to stand up there and talk about a threat to democracy when he's created a plutocracy where he's purchased all three branches of government in this state. He's supported by thugs. He got 23% of the vote. This isn't a democracy. He's underwater in terms of his approval. And the way that they pass bills in Illinois is to try to mute democratic principles of dissent and debate with all these shell bills. So the whole idea that this guy is standing up and in the most sanctimonious possible way, whining about democracy, I think is why Trump picked him in the first place and why it's so smart, just because he is such a rank hypocrite.
Well, it's also smart to a degree, Patrick, because Trump also knows that Pritzker's not going to go anywhere from this. And I'm sorry, JB Pritzker's comms department, if you're I know you're watching this. I know you're watching this. You followed us on Twitter. I know you're watching this damn podcast. You're not going anywhere. I don't care what you tell your boss every Friday when you send them the media hits that like, oh, look, Mr. Governor, look how many times you were talked about in the Washington Post this week. You're going to be president for sure. You're not going to be president. So Trump can kind of just pick on you because you're just going to keep, yeah, sure, you'll be in the news, but it's not like you're ever going to be a serious threat of like being president of the United States. So yeah, you're going to keep getting picked on here. And the other thing I want to mention about this, which I think is hilarious, because in any other place in the country, Brandon Johnson would be able to just like ride his coattails in this. Chicago's a Democratic town. You know, he could play off the liberals and be like, look, I'm standing up to Trump. Problem is, Brandon Johnson sucks so much. Yeah, sure, I guarantee he'll get a little bit of a boost in the polls from this. Yeah, like some of those progressives will start crawling back to him, but he's still toast. He's still toast. And honestly, it's a pretty good play on Trump's part. You got the most unpopular mayor in the country. There's nothing that can save him. And you got the governor who thinks he's going to be president, but the Democratic Party just flat out doesn't want anymore. So good luck with that. Honestly, from a political perspective, well done on Trump for picking on this state. Well done.
So I'd say this, and this is kind of to Patrick's point. I want to take us to another topic here, which is another Patrick Finkston wrote something this week, and I don't remember if it was behind the paywall or not. I didn't note that, so I'll be careful how much I quote out of it. But he was talking about how this has big risks for Pritzker, and it has even bigger risks for Illinois. On how much this could hurt the people of the state. This back and forth fight between Trump and Pritzker, as Chris said, that's what it is. It's a carefully choreographed political fight between somebody who is president and somebody who wants to be president. But the people who are going to pay the price are the people of Illinois. And Patrick's point was, that we could start to feel the pain. I think he said in here somewhere that we are feeling it a little bit now, but I would contend we're already feeling it. I mean, you see that. Trump halted $2 billion in transit funding for Chicago for the Red Line extension, which, by the way, should be taken a look at because it's become a massive boondoggle for government spending as one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, above ground transit program or transit, whatever, in the whole world. So, yeah, we should probably take a look at that. He's canceled energy projects across the country in blue states, including 583 million of them in Illinois, which, by the way, I watch all these Democrats in Illinois say, oh, you can't just pick on blue states like that. And I'm like, wait a second. In every year's budget, you give money to blue districts for transit projects, but you give no money to red districts. Trump's just doing the same thing you do to Republicans in this state. But of course, you're only okay if you're screwing over Chris Balkema. You're not okay if you get screwed over by this, but whatever. And we saw even the fallout here where Metra and CTA were awarded federal grants for safety, and they need it, especially at the CTA. I mean, that's the number one concern and frustration with the CTA is the lack of safety. They were allocated $15.7 million in transit security money this year, but now they're talking about, well, I don't know if we want to take it because it might come with some strings that we've got to help with federal immigration enforcement. Like $16 million to make the CTA safer seems like a good use of money, but again, because of politics, it's not going to be taken, I'm sure. They're not going to make the CTA safer, which is something we really need. Like this fight has really hurt Illinoisans already. And to Patrick's point, he is correct that it absolutely has the potential of hurting Illinoisans way worse. I think his line was, here we go, I found it. Tread carefully, Governor. It would appear you have more to lose in this fight than Trump does. And I would contend Illinoisans have more to lose in this fight than Trump does. And I think that's part of this that's getting lost in the politics and the drama of the whole thing.
Well, the red line expansion was going to be dead anyway, and the red line expansion was going to be dead for years. I've been telling everybody who will listen to me ever since I got involved in politics and found out that they wanted to expand the red line. Like, this isn't going to happen, guys. This isn't going to happen. I've talked to engineers. I've talked to people who work for construction companies who are putting bids in for this, and they're like, "Oh, it's going to happen. It's going to not happen. Not happen." You know why? Because the state's broke city. This became expanding the red line from 95th and Orion down to Riverdale somehow became like the biggest like transit operation in American history, world history. How do we do that? Because it's the state of Illinois. So of course these things happen. So red line expansion wasn't happening anyway. But again, I 100% agree with you, Collin. The Trump's playing the Democrats' game here. Every year the Democrats say, listen, you don't vote for the budget, you ain't getting nothing if you're a Republican. Well, Trump's saying, hey, I just want to send the criminals back to wherever they came from. You either got to put up with that or you ain't getting nothing from me. He's playing the Democrats' game. I appreciate that. Republicans can do a lot of good by playing the Democrats' game and having a transactional understanding of politics. Trump's always had that. So that's a lesson for today. Sometimes it's a give and take world, and you got to remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, it just seems somebody's making the point, and I forget where it is, and they were saying that Trump is actually de facto leader of the Democratic Party because you can basically discern what their position is as the polar opposite of whatever Trump says, which I thought was a really good point. So, like, Trump is essentially dictating what the Democratic agenda is, which is essentially, if I'm for it, you're ultimately going to be against it. And I think there's a lot of confusion just with regard to what a sanctuary state is. And essentially, the sanctuary state, it's not like the city of Chicago is welcoming legal immigrants. It's not like they're giving them housing or things like it. Basically means that they passed what's called the Trust Act. And the Trust Act essentially says,
just to be clear, that stuff is happening, just not because of the Trust Act. Let's be
just
clear.
Not because of the Trust Act. Yeah. But that's how people define what a sanctuary state is whether or not you pass something akin to a Trust Act. There's only so many things that a state can do with respect to immigration policy because they can't legislate in that area or otherwise the law, regulation, or otherwise is going to get preempted. They pass the Trust Act, which basically means that if there's an ICE warrant or a ICE detainer, that police can't turn those people over if they arrest them to the federal government. And that's essentially what it is. And so it really did nothing to help illegal aliens.
I think my point on that, just for time, I just want to say that I think Republicans and everyone does this a disservice by hyper-focusing on the Trust Act, because it's so much bigger than just the Trust Act. That the fact is that if you're a non-citizen, there are absolutely opportunities for you to get free healthcare, free housing, all sorts of free government assistance that isn't available to the average Illinoisan who is here legally or is here with full legal status. But that's not because of the Trust Act. And I think the fault that a lot of Republicans make and a lot of people make is to hyper focus on the Trust Act, and that's what makes us a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state, and that's not true. But there are absolutely tax dollars being spent on non-citizens in this state. Democrats want those tax dollars to be spent. As a matter of fact, part of the reason why the federal government is shut down is that they want the non-citizens to have access to healthcare benefits. So I want to shift this off the Trust Act focus is all I want to do. Let's close on this part, and then we'll finally move on. And this one is what Republicans should or shouldn't be talking about. Patrick has said this a few times during the segment, and he's right, that Republicans need to be careful a bit here. Because if you want to go hard in at immigration, you want to go hard in at backing Trump sending in the troops into Chicago, listen, it makes you feel good. It feels good on X or on Facebook, but the reality is, number one, it's a slippery slope for the future, as Patrick said. Number two, as the political guy here, I'll tell you, it does not poll well. And so if you want to be smart about a general election strategy coming out, rah, troops in Chicago, this is great, just be careful, because already this doesn't poll very well. And the first time something happens, because you know the left is going to do whatever they can to make sure something happens, where a National Guardsman, ideally a Texas National Guardsman in their minds, does something that they can get on camera and go, look, see violence, it's going to go badly for anybody who supported that. So I applaud all those politicians who are standing up saying, listen, we need to be adults and work together. That's the correct angle to take on this. Be careful not to be in there going, hey, I'm all about the National Guard. I'm all about troops in Chicago. I've got 3 polls right in front of me, 2 public and 1 private that we did, that all show the National Guard in Chicago is not popular with voters. So just be very careful on this. Number one, don't get stuck on the bad parts of this. And number two, be smart and turn it back to crime. Crime is where we have solid winning ground when it comes to Chicago, when it comes to this whole issue. Immigration's a hot button. There's some pluses, some minuses right now on that issue, but crime is where we win. I see the House Republicans on the Illinois side have done a good job on this occasionally. They put out a graphic that showed some of the people that ICE had arrested, DUI, vehicle burglary, armed robbery, sex offender. Like, that's what you should point to, that the people that are being picked up, the ones that are being targeted, it's about the crime. It's about the crimes they've committed. We want to protect victims. They're pro-criminal. They're far left, progressive agendas. What's led to this? That's how you approach this on the Republican side if you want to be on solid winning ground on the polling side. And here's another angle to this, and I'll finally stop on this. But during a recent interview, Greg Bovino talked about how they've seen more weapons in Chicago in 1 month than they saw in 4 months in Los Angeles. And by the way, that's not by accident. Remember, Kim Foxx actively stopped prosecuting gun crimes in Chicago as part of her, well, not stopped, but reduced as part of her pro-criminal agenda. She arbitrarily rejected all gun and drug charges that stem from traffic stops. Down in Springfield, we've covered this repeatedly over and over. You've seen Democrats who've tried to reduce mandatory minimums for crimes, including crimes committed with a firearm. They've tried to limit the prosecution of gun crimes. There's been more illegal guns recovered in Chicago than in New York City and Los Angeles combined. And just here on SFR, we've covered the fact that the Chicago Police Department had to turn to the feds because back when Kim Foxx was state's attorney, she wouldn't prosecute gun crimes, and they wanted to get the guns off the streets, the illegal guns off the streets. And remember, not that long ago, Kwame Raoul, Democrat, Attorney General from Illinois, was upset because the House Democrats allowed to sunset a law that would that sentenced automatically or raise the sentence amount for repeat gun offenders. Like, this has been over and over part of the pro-criminal far left agenda of Democrats in the state, is to stop prosecuting criminals and especially stop prosecuting gun crimes and illegal guns and basically keep them on our streets. So now you see that federal law enforcement is here in Chicago and they're like, why are there so many weapons on the streets? This is actively what Democrats have wanted and have done for years in Illinois with this pro-criminal agenda. It's the law-abiding gun owners on our side of the aisle who say, yeah, let's punish those who use weapons, use guns illegally and use them to commit crimes. And so that's something to point to again, that it's the crime, and it's Democrats have created this environment for years in Illinois and Chicago. That's why this was necessary. Focus on the crime, and you're on solid ground. Any final thoughts on this, or have we beat this issue completely to death?
Well, I just don't think you want the National Guard enforcing crime in Chicago. Like, is that what you're saying? Because I don't think
I'm not saying specifically the National Guard. I'm saying that it's the issue here is the crime.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem is the crime in Chicago. That's, if Republicans want to win on this, that's the ground they need to stay on. The problem is crime. Don't get lost on Broadview and ICE and National Guard and all that, because you saw it here on this podcast that Kenneally told you over and over how, listen, we got some egg on our face on this side of it. So, Patrick, you helped prove this point that if we stay on that ground, we're on shaky ground. If you focus on crime, you've been on our podcast before, you agree that crime is a problem, that the pro-criminal agenda by progressive Democrats has been a problem. Focus on that. That's winning ground. Am I wrong?
No, I think that you're right, but I think it's important to separate those issues. And I think people can at once be concerned about the expansion of executive authority, especially with regard to military boots on the ground in Chicago, and at the same time, crime in Chicago.
My point is, don't separate it. If you want to win elections, don't separate it.
Well, I guess fine, but I just think that you're going to be confusing a lot of people because that's not even the basis by which Trump is bringing up the National Guard. So when they go into court to argue against Kwame Raoul, they're not going to bring up the fact that they're there to fight crime. They're going to say that they are there to assist federal officers who are being obstructed by various mobs in and around Chicago. If they even try to say that they're there to stop or prevent crime, the judge is going to throw them out because that would be a clear violation of the Insurrection
Patrick,
Act.
I'm aware. I'm not saying that the National Guard should be saying this. I'm talking to Republican candidates and giving them advice. That's our job on this podcast. I know you're struggling with that concept, but that's what we're trying to do here, is help instruct Republicans how to win elections in this state.
Okay. Well, that, like, if that's like, fair enough. And I guess, I just think it's important that Republicans are also honest about the fact, especially in Illinois, where Trump is not the most popular person in the world, that there's also the question of abuse of executive authority and overreach. And the only reason that Trump's allowed to do this is because of the desolation that these Democrats have left, especially in areas of the city where the murder rate in District 3, the police district in Chicago,
so you're
is
making
10
my
times
point.
the average. 10 times.
So you're making my
10
point.
times.
You just said
I
I'm
know,
wrong,
no,
I'm wrong,
I
and
know.
then you made my point.
And I guess I'm just parsing it, and like I
Don't
think
parse
you
it.
and I both agree.
Stop being a
Mom,
lawyer.
Dad,
Stop
quit
parsing
fighting,
I like
everything you
please.
say.
parsing.
Tearing this
Drawing
family
distinctions
apart.
is what we do as lawyers.
Jeez.
That's my whole
There are
job.
children
Lane,
watching.
no more
please.
lawyers on this podcast. My goodness, what's going on here? All right, let's poor Chris. He wants to talk veto session. He's had to sit here while we all talked about crime in the city. So
Senator Chris wants to talk veto session.
yeah, there you go. Balkema, Senator Chris. All right, so let's get over to you, Senator. Thank you for your patience and letting us sort of go back and forth, and letting Patrick. I don't know what that all was, but we'll figure it out. So let's talk about veto session here in Illinois. It starts next week. As a high-level discussion on veto session, from what we're hearing, is that maybe not a lot's going to get done in the first week of veto session because there's 2 weeks of it. I don't know what you're hearing, Senator, but looks like maybe not a ton will be done in the first week. But I want to pass it over to you for your thoughts, because obviously lawmakers going down to Springfield, there's a lot they're talking about. Maybe some good, probably not so good that they want to push forward down in Springfield. What are you hearing about veto session?
Yeah, Senate Bill 40, now Senate Bill 25, appears to be in the front and center from the energy side. So that is a interesting concept here as we move forward, and I've been trying to immerse myself in learning as much as possible.
All right, and we're going to do, so last week we covered transit in depth. We wanted to cover energy in depth, but we didn't have time. So we're going to do a whole topic on energy next. I want to cover anything else for veto session first, and then we're going to dive into energy because it deserves a whole in-depth discussion on this podcast, which we're going to do. So let's get into anybody else hearing anything just sort of high level on veto session or things that might get moved. I've heard, obviously we got to talk transit a little bit just to kind of catch people up on what's happened. They're talking about legislation that might help the Chicago Bears move to Arlington Heights. Their mega projects bill. We've also heard maybe some immigration stuff is going to be pushed forward. I don't know how much of that's going to be performative versus actually substantive. You guys hearing anything on any of that?
I'm curious specifically to see if the assisted suicide bill gets pushed along. It did pass the House during the spring session. There was a lot of originally it was a Senate bill, and it was interesting the House was the only one who passed it. So that's what I'm interested to see if that moves forward during veto session.
Yeah, Chris, the toll transit thing's going to be interesting. It broke as we were recording last week, and our guest brought that up, thankfully, that the RTA has reported the gap now isn't 790 million or 770 million, whatever it was. Now apparently it's approximately 200 million. And Demmer talked about how he felt that possibly that could be a bit of push on their end to a strategery, if you will, on their end. I know a lot of people who've been pushing to reform transit in Chicagoland are not happy about the whole situation, and they're not happy with the RTA. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Does that push it back, or do they still try to push through some kind of reform? Of course, I use my air quotes on reform because the reality is it's a bailout of the CTA on suburban and statewide taxpayers' backs, and it's pulling away a lot of suburban control of Pace and Metro, especially, and putting it in the pockets of JB Pritzker and Tony Preckwinkle and a little bit Brandon Johnson. That's the reform that they're talking about. So transit is definitely going to be a big thing that we're all going to be watching.
For the record, I said assisted suicide. I didn't say anything about transit. So I don't know if you were saying something else as a side thing, or you were responding.
Yeah, sorry, I missed you. I thought you were talking transit, but I missed what you said. But my head was on transit, so I just shared my thoughts. There you go. What else?
I agree, Chris. I agree with Chris. That the assisted suicide bill may come up. I hope it doesn't. I'm certainly against it 100%, and I hope we can continue to have a culture of life in Illinois.
Patrick seems like he agrees with that.
I think it's 100%. I think that's grotesque and vile.
We also have the mega projects potential bill. You've got both sides kind of pushing either for or against that. If you don't know what that is, it's essentially letting mega projects, so those that invest at least $100 million and commit to stay for at least 20 years, the ability to negotiate their long-term predictable property tax agreements with local governments. You've got people on the economic development side who want that. Obviously, the Chicago Bears want to see that. You see some people lining up against that. The arguments they're using against it, especially some of the AFP people, is a little far out there. I encourage them to. You're going to lose this issue if you just keep giving massively inflated numbers. They're claiming that the Bears would be a $5 billion complex, and that they would owe like what, 200 and some odd million dollars per year in their property taxes, but this is going to give them a 96% reduction. Those numbers are nowhere near accurate. It is absolutely way outside what would actually be happening here. And this bill, this project, this whatever, deserves a reasonable discussion on whether or not it's a good thing for the state of Illinois. But let's actually argue the merits instead of just making up numbers.
I mean, I think the theme is all in Springfield is always, hold on to your wallets, right? Because if they do this bailout and some of the other things that they're talking about, I mean, it's going to be really bad for Illinoisans. And I mean, we'll see what they end up pushing forward.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, let's go over to, I know Chris wanted to talk about energy, and so let's oblige him here. We've got the senator here, and we should talk about it. So we wanted to cover this for a few weeks now, that energy rates in Illinois have skyrocketed. Now, keep in mind that the massively higher energy bills was for the period, I think it was June 1st through the end of September. And so we are now past that period where it's still pretty high, just a tad less. I think we got a lot of notes here. I don't have it all in front of me, but there's a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of drop here as we move forward. And obviously with it not being in summer, people will be paying lower energy bills just in general. But here's the thing you got to realize: energy will remain a very hot topic for working families and for these smart candidates and smart politicians, because it has already the auction has already been done for next year starting on June 1st, and that one's going to go up again even more. So energy is going to keep being a big deal, especially as we get into next summer in the heat of the general election. Electricity bills, energy bills is going to be a big deal. So this absolutely deserves our focus. Chris, what are your thoughts on this, on Democrats trying to push through essentially just a continuation of the same green agenda that has put us in this mess in the first place?
Yes, Senate Bill 25 is a lot of it's focused on the battery storage, and overall, as I look at the big picture and needed to get up to speed, since this was 104th was my first session, at a high level, we right now Illinois need about 130 gigawatts of power, that's capacity. By 2045, which is when CEJA says that no natural gas, no coal, we would need 156, so 26 gigawatts more. That means that right now nuke's about 50%, 52% of our pie. Fossil fuels is about 40%, coal and natural gas. And then renewables currently is 18. In order to get the 40 to zero, fossil fuels goes away in 20 years. We would have to add about 2.5 gigawatts per year between now and 2045. If you look at the math, it's almost impossible. We've got some pent up solar demand trying to get onto the grid. They have a backlog. Illinois last year put on 2.5 gigawatts installed of mainly solar. That was a record. We'd have to break that record almost every year in order for CEJA to work. So in the big picture, I think everybody realizes that in the year, 2021, when CEJA was passed, we didn't have AI. We didn't realize the consumption was going to increase, but the math doesn't work. There's no way to have just renewables. And then we still have the moratorium on nuclear. So we can't expand nuclear. So we would have to increase so much solar and wind to make that work. Now it's this battery thing is, install batteries on the grid. Texas does it. They charge at night when the electricity is cheap. So you plug in, you charge the batteries at night, electricity is cheap. And then 2 p.m. and the next afternoon when demand's high, you discharge for 3 or 4 hours. And that's kind of a peak shaving process. But that in itself, in other states, Texas included, runs in a capitalistic model. If it works, it works. We don't need a lot of government subsidies. So unfortunately, Senate Bill 25 And oh, by the way, Senate Bill 25, if passed in the current form, would raise a charge would get tacked on to grandma's electric bill as well as a company's electric bill. And so it's kind of a lose-lose. I still am trying to get my arms around, number one, how we thought CJA could possibly work with the math in 20 years. But now the second piece coming along, Senate Bill 25, that looks like it may be in front of us. The way it's written right now is just, it's bad for Illinois.
Yeah, and Chris, that has not been covered nearly enough, which is that ratepayers will pay for this battery initiative that's being pushed by Democrats down in Springfield. And I think the other part, Chris, we talked about this over the last few weeks, that Republicans stand for an all of the above energy agenda. We're not against batteries. We're not against wind. We're not against solar. We simply want to say, hey, listen, we need an all of the above approach. This idea that we're not going to build the cleanest energy we have, which is nuclear energy, that we're going to shut down our coal plants, which, by the way, Illinois, like Springfield has one of the cleanest coal plants in the entire country. We're just going to arbitrarily shut those down because of that scary word coal, that we're going to shut down our natural gas plants before we're ready, before we have the ability to sustain it. That's the common sense that Republicans are like, that this, as you just said, this math doesn't math. We want to be cleaner. We want to protect our environment. We want to do this in as clean of a way as possible. But right now, working families cannot afford to continue to subsidize this move to 100% green energy before we can actually physically make it possible. That is the problem here. Working families, small businesses, especially manufacturers, are absolutely struggling with these high costs. Republicans believe in an all of the above approach. The problem is right now, the left, it's batteries and nothing else. Like, could we please have, they keep bringing up Texas. It's like, yeah, Texas does batteries and they do oil and they do gas and they do nuclear. It's an all of the above approach, which is why Texas works. If we did that in Illinois, we would not be having this conversation about the sky high energy rates, utility rates, gas, electricity prices. Like, if we could just do that, Republicans could get on board.
We do have the nice part about Illinois is we do have a deregulated market already. So if we added capacity and allowed capacity to be added, to your point, there's nothing wrong with solar, there's nothing wrong with wind. A true story, in my district, I had a set of solar panels that was a company was wanting to install, ready to install. The county board passed it, they agreed to it. Guess where it was at? It was not on some rich farm ground where a lot of people say, please don't put solar panels. It was on top of a garbage dump. It was on top of a garbage dump actually outside of Streator, Illinois. The company had trouble paying for a $27 million transformer because they tripped the trigger as being the provider that would cause a large increase in capacity, a transformer. And they couldn't pay that bill themselves. ComEd would not allow them to spread the cost with other providers. And so, some of those practical situations where if we just did a both and approach, we'll take more clean coal, we'll take more nuclear, please, we'll take more solar, more wind. We could be an exporter of energy, and in our deregulated model, which most other states don't have, we could have the lowest prices around and be an incredible provider and help grow the GDP of our state.
Yep. 100%. And right now, what we see is Southern Illinois, where they're importing their energy, they're importing from coal energy producing states. So we are importing dirty energy instead of, at least we had cleaner options in the state before we started shutting them down. I mean, it's patting ourselves on the back to say we did something when in reality we're actually making things worse, both for the environment and for working families. And the reality is, I want to give a shout out to Lou Sandoval from the Illinois Chamber. He put in an op-ed in the Daily Herald, said, slow down, let's consider the impact here, and said similar things what we talked about here. Not against battery storage, but let's do this right. Because right now, just batteries, if that's the centerpiece of your plan, we're talking about adding to the cost for working families and not really solving the major problem here. He said the General Assembly made the right decision to delay action of the bill during the spring session. As we head towards the fall veto session, lawmakers have another opportunity to get this right. That means slowing down, engaging with the full spectrum of stakeholders, which is what we're talking about, and crafting a policy that supports, not hinders, economic growth. And he said Illinois businesses want to be part of this state's energy future, but we need a plan that reflects economic reality, encourages investment, and protects ratepayers. That's what they're looking for. But right now, again, we can't get a seat at the table. It's just the environmentalists get the whole table because JB Pritzker wants their support when he runs for president, and a common sense approach is just apparently not in the cards right now, which is frustrating.
One thing I'm curious is, and all of the very, very skilled folks on the phone here who have a lot of more experience than me, why would the entire environmental section of the world in Illinois not be for nuclear? In other words, nuclear emits zero, and so why wouldn't we all want? There's Senator Sue Resin has a standalone bill, I forget the number, to just repeal our moratorium. So nothing else, like Senate Bill 4025, you get balled up into a bunch of stuff. But just to remove the moratorium, companies like Exelon say, hey, in 7 years, 8 years, I could have the next nuclear power plant running. If it emits zero carbon, why is anybody against that?
The question is a valid one, which we've talked about a lot on this podcast, especially in light of the fact that the Democratic governor of Wisconsin just signed a bill that was passed by Democrats and Republicans in his legislature to allow for the building of nukes in Wisconsin. You just saw Gavin Newsom sign an energy affordability package in California that, yes, pushes forward some of what the left wants to see here, and it increases oil drilling and supports nuclear. I mean, you're seeing, other than Pritzker, you're seeing blue state or blue Democrat or blue governors who are supporting all of the above approaches to energy. But here in Illinois, it's just this little sliver and nothing else.
Well, the answer more so is, and Colin's 100% right, but it's also the Democrats kind of hitched their wagons to the solar and wind lobbies back in like the 90s or something like that. So they've kind of been riding it out this entire time. And because Illinois is the way Illinois is, these solar and wind lobbies have power over these people. These environmental nut jobs, the people who have climate. What was it? What did you say earlier, Patrick? They have climate awareness and stuff like that. Climate anxiety. Yes. These are the people who are controlling the energy narrative in this state because they're the ones who are writing the large checks to the Democratic legislature. They're the ones who are promising large checks to JB Pritzker for president, of which he'll get 1% of the vote. So that's really what this is all about. It is, if the nuclear lobby, and listen, let's be honest about the state for a second, but if the nuclear lobby had gotten to these people first, if the nuclear lobby had gotten to the Democratic Party first back in the 90s and said, hey, this could be renewable. That was back when everyone was still freaking out over 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and all these different things. So that's why that really never went anywhere. Now we're in 2025. Nuclear is known to be more efficient. It's safer. Actually, nuclear ends up killing less people than wind turbines and solar panels do, which is actually kind of funny in a way. But that's really it. Is that the solar and the wind people? They're the ones who got into the Democrats first, and they're going to roll with that as long as it's politically viable for them to do so. Did I say anything wrong there, anybody?
And if you look at the national environment, I think Pritzker's looking at Newsom and others sort of taking energy and taking more of a middle-of-the-road approach. And yet again, he's like, well, my lane's on the far, far left. So he's scooting even further left, even on an issue where I don't think he needs to. He has hinted over the last few months that maybe he's softening in his viewpoint on nuclear. So maybe we'll finally see some common sense out of Pritzker and the Democrats down in Springfield. But I'll believe it when I see it.
I think we need a lot of energy, and we need to produce everything. So let's get on board and open the spigot. And
yeah, especially considering we've got some of the best workers in this country here in Illinois. Our manufacturing industry is, despite all of the challenges, in many ways, finding ways to thrive despite everything they have to face in this state and with other factors. You open this up for even more manufacturing, even more production, and continue to produce energy. And as you said, export that energy. It's a win for all of us. I don't know why we can't just sit down and be adults and pursue that. All right, we got to talk some politics. This is a political podcast, and I always nudge us in that direction, and then we get common sense guests like State's Attorney Patrick Kenneally, who fights me on it and makes me look like an idiot. So now let's just force him to play some politics here. Let's have some fun and talk politics. So anybody who knows politics knows that the quarterly reports for fundraising are due both for federal and state candidates by, I think it's the 15th, but yeah, that wouldn't fall on a weekend. So yeah, it'd be the 15th. Some have already reported early, some have not. But obviously all of us are looking. We're all wondering, especially for some of these statewide candidates and these federal candidates. And my friend Russell Lissow from the Daily Herald ran a piece which he called to my attention, and I promised we'd talk about it here, where he's made it a thing every quarter to dive through all the reports and who's given to whom and who hasn't given to whom. Not a lot of reporters do that, so kudos to him. More of that should be done. And his big takeaway was something we kind of covered a little bit last week, which is Richard Uihlein, who was a big backer of Darren Bailey last time in the governor's race, is now backing Ted Dabrowski. That is a big change. And so that's certainly something possibly worth talking about. I think some of us had a takeaway on that it was only a quarter mil when we were told it was going to be $1 million. So we're wondering, why is it just a quarter of that for the Dabrowski campaign? But it is notable that it went to Dabrowski this time instead of Bailey. Kind of a catch-all. Anyone want to talk about these gubernatorial candidates, the election? If you've got a favorite candidate, you're welcome to share if you'd like. You're welcome to be biased on this podcast. It's okay.
Well, I think one of the things, right out the gate, Ted Dabrowski had a lot of those, A1s. It's been like 10 days when I just looked, and it's been 10 days since his last A1. So I don't know if he was kind of ending a lot of that to kind of make a splash, but you've got to continue bringing those dollars in. And none of these candidates really in the last, week, 2 weeks has brought in anything that is like significant other than, $250,000 from Uihlein. So it's like, it's going to be interesting when we see these reports next week, how much they brought in, what is their cash on hand, and kind of that'll give us a better idea of how this field is shaping up. But it doesn't look great. It doesn't look great.
I'm looking at the A1s like you are, and yeah, you've got Dabrowski's raised over $1 million plus the quarter mil that he put in, so he's definitely leading this field by a significant margin in fundraising, and kudos to him and his team for doing that. The question that we've asked is, we were told he had to raise $1 million so that Uihlein would put in $1 million. So now we've seen his $1 million that he raised. Uihlein's put in $250, not the $1 million. Hopefully there's more to come. But then, like as you just said, what's next? Like, okay, clearly you were working on that for I don't know how long, maybe a couple months, it seems. Was that it, or is there more to come? Because there have been no A1s since the end of September, basically since Uihlein's donation. But it's not like any of these other candidates are doing any better. I mean, Bailey's only raised $18,000, at least in A1s, since launching. Now, they do have a big focus on low-dollar contributors, so let's see what his report shows when it comes out between now and our next podcast. But only 18,000 in A1s is not great since your announcement. That means that's just for $1,000 and up contributions, $18K isn't going to cut it. He did get $40K in kinds from the Save Illinois PAC, which is Brett Corrigan's and Mike Miller's PAC. Most of that money was raised from the Trump events that they've done. I kind of wonder how many of those people who went to those events would have gone if they knew that the whole goal was to raise money to give to Darren Bailey, but whatever. It's clearly they had a whole plan here that they were executing. And then Jim Mendrick, if you're wondering why we don't talk about Mendrick, he had one A1 yesterday, and it was the first time in almost a month for $1,000. So until he shows he can, actually run a serious statewide campaign, we're mostly going to focus on Bailey and Dabrowski on this podcast. And so far from both of them, I'd like to see a bit more. You're not going to win a statewide election, let alone against billionaire JB Pritzker at these fundraising levels.
Well, and you look at these A1s from Bailey, I mean, I'm looking at it right now, $20,000 in kind from that Save Illinois PAC.
40 from Save Illinois.
Yeah, but it looks like 20 of it was spent on, the Drake Hotel, security at the hotel, and audio visual, right? I mean, some of those A1s are things that are material, probably shirts and signs and things of that nature, hats that they'll get some traction out of. But spending $20,000 on an announcement, for governor, when you're going to be scraping for cash, especially compared to what Pritzker has, seems like a bad idea in my book.
Well, here's the thing, Butler. Let's be honest with ourselves. The Darren Bailey, Aaron Del Mar team doesn't have to raise that much money, okay? Because they're starting out with such
primary.
Yeah. Well, we'll worry about the general when we get there, Collin.
No, we won't.
Yeah, this is the Illinois Republican Party we're talking about here. We'll worry about the general election when we get there, okay? How long have you been playing this game? Longer than I have. You know that the Republican Party don't think that far in advance, okay? So the Darren Bailey team, they're off to they have a pretty huge lead right now, so they could raise 2 cents, and all they have to do is get their grassroots going, and they'll beat Dabrowski by 6 points at least. So that's the advantage of the Darren Bailey's team's going to have. And Dabrowski, as we keep talking about, no name ID. We had the whole name ID conversation last week, 2 weeks ago. I don't know. They're all blurring together. I'm getting petitions. Butler is getting petitions. We're all getting petitions here. The weeks are merging together. And the point is that Dabrowski has to spend a lot of this money to get his name ID up because nobody knows who he is. So after Dabrowski spends $1 million on TV and digital ads and stuff like that to get his name ID up, where is he going to be after that? What kind of persuasion campaign is he going to run? He can't rely only on this $2 million. He could if he spent it great, or if he started spending it maybe a little earlier. Maybe we could have gotten somewhere. But again, Bailey doesn't need to have strong A1s. Bailey could show over the course of the next 3 months that he's only raised $150,000. I would say, yeah, all right, he's still probably going to win. It's all contingent on how Dabrowski spends his money. That's the reality.
Hey, listen, Chris, while I hear you, I think the point is that a lot of people are waiting to see who they're going to support in this election based on who can give us the best chance to beat JB Pritzker. So while I do agree that Bailey starts out way in the lead and doesn't need anywhere near as much money as Dabrowski will to win this primary, you are right on that. There are many of us who are waiting to see, is Bailey 3.0 or whatever it is, 4.0, is this version of Darren Bailey going to be capable of beating JB Pritzker? Because we have to nominate somebody who can defeat JB Pritzker. That's the only thing that matters. And so while you are right that he could probably win this primary on $15, fine, okay, I'll stipulate that. But many of us want to see, is he the guy? Can he lead this party in the general election? Or should we be all rushing over to Dabrowski because we need somebody who can win? And so we need to see a Darren Bailey who can raise money in the primary, because if he's not going to do it in the primary, he's not going to do it in the general. So we need to see
I agree with you, Collin. I do agree with you that in a just world, which this is not, but in a just world, Darren Bailey would raise, he would see what Dabrowski did. He'd just match it. He'd say, okay, I'm going to call up my donors. We're going to get some $250K donations going here. We're going to start a small fundraising operation. We'll match that $1.2, $1.3 million that Dabrowski has. Sure, that would be the ideal scenario. But like you just said, while people need to see Bailey perform in order to think that he has a chance, we also need to get something from Ted Dabrowski here. Because we can't just let Ted Dabrowski off the hook and say he's got $1.4 million. He's got a chance to beat Pritzker. It's not all about money. It's not. Let's be honest with ourselves here. We also have to look at the candidate is capable of running a campaign no matter how much money he has. And that's what we need to see from Ted Dabrowski. If you're an influencer, that's what I would expect. It's yeah, Ted, you got $1.2 million. What are you going to do with it? That's what I would say.
Well, listen.
I was going to say...
just real quick, and then just real quick to your point, Chris, I'm with you because people continue to say why are you so mean on these candidates? Trust me, when we talk internally, there's dozens of things that we don't share in this podcast because we're not trying to hurt any of these candidates. So we suppress a lot of the things. We go, okay, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have done that. Here's one example of something that was a big misstep by the Dabrowski camp this last week: going on a podcast run by a guy who is actively supporting the Proud Boys in Illinois. Dabrowski went on his podcast, and then on that podcast said he's against PICA, which bans assault weapons, high-capacity magazines, and switches. That is not going to play in the general. Talked about the mask mandates and the vaccines in schools, and there was a few quotes in there that he's absolutely going to regret having gone on that podcast. And it's just one example of many from this week. But each week it's something like that where what are you doing? Why are you doing that? That's Pritzker is going to skewer you for that in the general election.
Well, and let me just add this, and then Patrick can go because I know Patrick really wants to talk. Listen, Ted Dabrowski, don't think that you need to out crazy Darren Bailey to beat him in this primary. That is not what anybody is asking you to do. Nobody is asking you to shift yourself so far to the right you're passing Darren Bailey at some point. That is not what you need to do. This is your free advice from Chris for the week out of solidarity for my ethnic brother. Okay, my free advice is you beat Darren Bailey not by out crazying him. You beat Darren Bailey by being a better campaigner than him, by being a better candidate than him. Stop trying to go on these podcasts or shift yourself further to the right or try and get a headline. Like, I get it. But you know what? You got some money behind you, Ted. Start putting that money to good use. Start building a story around yourself. You got a great story, man. Figure it out. That's how you're going to beat Darren Bailey. Think, Ted, Patrick, take it away.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, like, I think we're coming at this a little bit more sober-minded, especially in view of the fact that Trump is president. I think there's a lot of people who see Darren Bailey and see his flaws, and in view of past experience, while they may agree and they want to sort of rah-rah and cheer him on across the finish line and send him up against Pritzker, I think that we are all a little bit more aware of the fact that what we ultimately need, Collin, to your point, is somebody that's able to beat Governor Pritzker. And to me, if you want to beat Governor Pritzker, it's not necessarily going back to the Uline trough and then just hoping the Republicans are going to rally around you after the primary. That's not going to work. That's never worked. We have an amazing opportunity in view of the fact that Governor Pritzker wants to be the president. That means that he is a national figure. That means that he is of interest to the National Republican Party. And so the one and only thing that if I was a candidate for governor that I would do and that I would hope the National Republican Party would be shaping this race and supporting me and pumping me with as much money as I can to land as many punches on Pritzker to weaken him as best as I can going into 2028. And the fact that we have candidates who don't seem to be able to leverage that and don't seem to be able to leverage that money and support, I find deeply problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my point too, that there is absolutely fundraising potential and capacity out there, and none of these candidates seem to be able to tap into it. And there's so much frustration with Pritzker. It's again, I know fundraising is difficult. I get it. I teach it. I know it's the worst part of politics, but you want to run for governor, man, then you better get out there and fundraise, because otherwise get out of the way for somebody who will, because it's a necessary evil. It's a necessary part of politics. I don't want to put you in the spot, Senator, but I know you've run for office before. It's not fun to fundraise, but you've proven to be fairly adept at it. It takes hard work, but it's possible if you put in the effort.
Yes, that's true. It's been fun as a grassroots effort to grow from within. The nice thing about the truth is it never changes, it just grows. And so over time, building a reputation and building a product, which is your word, that's all that you have. When I was at my company, we made big yellow machines. We had a product. When I'm in Springfield, talking to people in my district, I have my word. That's all I have. And over time, sometimes you can build slowly, and people begin to build trust, and that's when they'll be more comfortable opening up their pocketbooks. In this case, we really need to change out the governor in 2026. I would really appreciate the Republicans don't need to be in the majority in the House and the Senate. If we just were able to change out the governor, I think we'd be in a situation where we would have a lot more going for us. And so we do need to rally together. We do need to make sure that the majority of the 13 million people agree with that. And along with that comes money. I think building trust along the way and relating to the vast majority of the 13 million is going to get these candidates a lot further down the pike, a lot quicker, because we are at the tipping point in so many different areas.
And some people like to take people out of context. So I don't want anybody taking Senator Chris Balkema out of context there. I know, Senator, the long-term goal here is, yes, to get into the majority in the House and the Senate. But your point is a valid one, that if we want to be relevant in the state, we need to start picking up seats in the legislature. And yes, we have a chance here to flip the governor's mansion, which will really jumpstart that effort. So for anybody who maybe was going to take you out of context there, I wanted to make sure I clarified that.
Yeah, it's a good point. We just have to take this thing in steps. And to be able to turn the whole state red, even by 2030, that's really not out of the question. We just have to go little by little, and we have to gain momentum. And I think that the nice thing about the 2026 election is we have the maps that we have. And so from a big picture perspective, the only map that matters for the governor is the state border lines. And so rallying the troops there is super important. Along the way, I think you're right. In from the House and the Senate side, if we pick up seats little by little, we can continue to move Illinois forward. We just can't bite off everything all at once. And I think focusing on a 2026 gubernatorial race will be very, very beneficial. along with the seats that we think we can pick up in the House and the Senate. And there are some out there. So you're absolutely right. We just got to take it in steps.
All right, let's talk about a couple legislative races, and then we will close down our podcast. So first here, let's talk about House District 94. So Norine Hammond has pulled a Republican primary challenger, Josh Higgins. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran, school board member of West Central Schools, and he's going to be running against Norine in that primary. I know a lot of people are pointing to Tom DeVore got real excited about this on social media, saying this was a Tom DeVore candidate that was running. If that's your reporting on this and you've never stepped foot in Western Illinois, you just spend your time reporting on it from 100 miles away and looking at Facebook. There's more to this than that specifically, but certainly there's a conversation to be had here about the efficacy or value of challenging Republicans in primaries. Curious if anybody has thoughts on the race or just the idea of it in general.
It seems like, on paper and then from what I've seen on social media, that this, candidate is one that is of higher quality. Josh Higgins compared to some of the candidates that we've seen in these other, legislative districts where there have been primaries. So it'll be interesting to see, what he's able to accomplish. But I know, Collin, I think you and I disagree a little bit on primaries, and let us leave it at that.
No, listen, we can have it out quickly here. I mean, listen, I think the point you made is the one I wanted to make, which is this is not a Tom DeVore candidate. He clearly seems to be excited by this. Maybe he'll get involved. But if you know anything about Western Illinois politics, you understand that there is all sorts of infighting amongst Republicans out there, and there has been for a while, whether it's Rock Island or up in Winnebago. There's been infighting for a long time. There's frustrations with Tony McCombie and Norine Hammond from a lot of the, grassroots people, even local Republicans, some of the county Republican leaders are unhappy and are getting involved in some of these fights. This is bigger than just one individual who gets a lot of attention on Facebook. It's bigger than that. And as you said, this is going to be a real race. I mean, you look at Tony McCombie's primary challenger, it's not going to be a serious race. Severin's going to be fine. A lot of these primary challengers out there, Charlie's going to be fine. Like a lot of them are going to be fine in their races, but this one is definitely going to be one to watch because it's bigger. Listen, from what I've heard, I've talked to a bunch of people out there. There wasn't just one candidate who wanted to run here. There were multiple candidates. There's money here. There's locals here. There's support here. There is some frustration with Norine Hammond and Tony McCombie, and they kind of are tied at the hip a bit. And I don't know Norina at all. She was on one of our live episodes. She did pretty well. And what I don't like is sort of the sniping from people, from one corner of the state at the other because they just don't like each other. That's what I'm not a fan of. But locally, there's a reason why we have the primary structure. If locally people don't think their representative is doing a good job, that's what leads to these challenges. This isn't a candidate who has arisen out of these petty fights between DeVore and McCombie and Hammond and Charlie Meyer and all those. That's not what this is. And if that's what you're reporting here, you're missing the larger picture. This is definitely one worth watching because it's a bigger battle than that. This is bigger than just sort of the petty personality fights we tend to have as Republicans. And primaries are, Michael, I'm trying to get you jazzed up here. We've had a little bit of a snoozy podcast here. Michael, when it comes to primaries, I've got an issue when people involve themselves in races that they've got nothing to do with. They're like, hey, I'm going to go primary so-and-so. That's where I say, you know what, that's not a good primary for the party. You're just wasting resources. But listen, we're going to talk about it next. Tony McCombie and HRO have gone up and recruited a candidate in House District 51 because they didn't like the candidate that had run before. You see, Kane County just had a whole brouhaha over the fact that they were the local county was upset because they wanted Lori Parman, and HRO and their staff came up and are pushing somebody else. I mean, it's kind of incumbent on, if HRO is going to go up and sort of pick primary battles in some of these other races, they can't really get too upset when it happens in one of their races. And Tony's out there picking fights. I mean, she recruited somebody to run an aisle 17 against a guy who had already been in the race for a while because she didn't like him and his campaign chairman. She's getting herself involved in a state Senate race down there. I don't know why, but she is. Like, it's hard to feel bad when it's like, okay, well, you're picking fights over here. Yeah, okay, so somebody came after your top person, but I'm sorry, that's how it works. You can't cry, hey, we got to be unified if you're sort of playing the same game.
Yeah.
So we'll watch the race. We'll see how it plays out, but people should keep an eye on 94 because it looks like that's going to be a big race. I mentioned it already. Let's talk about House District 51. So Tosi Ufodike ran last time. We've talked about her a lot. I like her personally. I love her family, her and her husband and her kids. They're great, great people, but didn't perform super great in the last election. And so House Republicans, it looks like they've got their preferred candidate, and it's not going to be Tosi. Lori Smith is running. Looks like she's running with HRO support based on some of the things that we've seen. Looking at her bio, her resume, and just sort of the way she kind of likes to speak on social media, she looks pretty dynamic. This is going to be an interesting race there. 51's now an open seat. It does definitely lean Democratic, so it'll be a tough pickup for Republicans. But it looks like HRO feels like this new candidate, Lori Smith, will give them a better chance. Anybody have thoughts on 51? I mean, this is right up the street for me.
I'm just interested to see how much money that HRO is going to, or HRO would invest in a primary fight like this with one of their preferred candidates. And I've been hearing elsewhere, and not even hearing, just like seeing it in person, that just looking at petition tables, and that you can tell when someone has like the HRO petition formatting, you can tell when they have the SRO petition formatting, and just seeing that they're picking candidates in a few of these races where it's going to be primary. So I'm interested to see what that means monetarily, because a lot of the districts I've been seeing this happen in, they're not really on the radar. 51 should not be on anybody's radar. There's a few other ones that should not be on anyone's radar. And I'm interested to see how far this goes as primary, especially when you have people like Norine being primaried as well and some other incumbents. I'm interested to see where this goes.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate Republicans have historically been more willing to involve themselves in primary fights, whereas the House Republicans have historically not been as willing. But it does, Chris, look like that might be on HRO's side, might be a little different this time. We'll see. I think an interesting.
And if it's just like they have a preferred candidate, they're going to give them the petition formatting, like
maybe, yeah,
cool. Yeah. I mean that might just be more of the same as previous cycles. But if this actually means these candidates are going to get some money, that's what I want to see how this plays.
Yeah, let me just real quick, because every once in a while you got to let me get on my soapbox, since I mean, it is my podcast. So I'll just give me 1 minute on this. I want to lead a discussion on something when it comes to our messaging, because this race gives us a complete sort of two extremes, and neither one's really at where they need to be if you want to win as Republicans. And we try to do this podcast in a way that helps us grow as a party. So on the Tosi Ufodike side, I've had this noted, because when she announced, she said, if you want a typical career politician with focus group messaging, I'm not your candidate. I can speak to this. I understand this, that, Tosi's less interested in sort of like, this is what is effective and this is what polls well. She just wants to say what she wants to say. And that's sort of one side of this, because messaging's an art and a science. And the science part of that is you absolutely should go out there and figure out what messages are going to resonate best with the voters in your district. If you want to be an effective candidate, that should be part of the equation. It's not just, hey, I'm running so I can speak my mind. That's great, but you owe the party a little bit of a duty here to go out and run a winning campaign. And so I really didn't like that. That was part of Tosi's announcement, that, I'm not going to speak with focus group messaging. Okay, fine. It may sound good in a press release, but the reality is, it's a good thing to think about being as effective in your messaging as possible. On the flip side, you see, with a lot of the HRO races nowadays, they've clearly have put a lot of work into this, and I give them kudos, to start to focus group or focus test, pull their messaging and use better messaging, more effective messaging. Since we've been doing this podcast, we have seen a significant improvement on HRO's side. But here's the challenge with that. Again, I said both sides are taking it too far. On the HRO side, you see this if you pop on Lori Smith's website. You see that it's like there's 7, 8, 9 different themes here, and it bounces around constantly with how they describe the candidate. It's stronger schools, more affordable Illinois, and on issues, it's, hold on, here we go, fix our schools, lower costs for families, honest leadership. So on the issue side, they seem to be pretty consistent, and it's 3 issues. So good job, guys. This is awesome. But here's on the bad side and how they describe the candidate. First, it's, I'm a mom and I'm an educator. I'm a neighbor who's fed up. And then it's, I'm fighting for children and families. And then giving our children a brighter future. And then it's, too many people feel like they have no choice but to leave. And it's high crime, high taxes, rising crime in schools. I'm not a career politician. I'm a mother. I'm a special education teacher. I'm a fighter. I'm going to go toe to toe with the system. I'm going to bring accountability and resilience and real solutions. Join my movement. I have a heart for service. I'm not a politician. I'm a neighbor. I'm a trusted leader. I'm going to turn Illinois around. I'm tough. I'm resilient. I'm ready to deliver real solutions. All of that is poll tested, good, really positive language, but there's like 20 things there. And so I think my caution here is don't go the Tosi way where you say, I'm not going to do any work making sure my messaging is as effective as possible. But also you can't go the HRO side here where you're just dumping 20 different thematic languages here, different themes, different persuasive language, different persuasive messages. Pick one or a few and just rock them out. Just completely burn them into the minds of your voters, because if you tell them 20 things, they're going to forget all of it. If you want to have a good candidate, it's pick one theme. That's the rule. One theme and run with it all the way throughout. If every time you're out there, you're describing your candidate in a different way and you're describing what their mission is in a different way, voters are never, ever, ever going to remember that. It's one theme, 3 main issues. That's it. And yes, you may feel like you're saying the same thing over and over because you are, but that's good campaigning. You need to get your voters to remember what you have to, what you're saying, because you want to have them remember you when they go into the polls. If you tell them all sorts of stuff, they're going to remember none of it.
One illustration of that, Collin, which you're accurate on, is during my congressional run back in 2014. Those of us that were going around to the different districts and not in competing against each other, but in even those that were running against each other, we joked to the point that we could all give each other speeches, because everybody stuck to the same focus, and that was, I think, very effective.
And that's what you have to do. That is the requirement if you want to burn through, because voters right now, they are inundated with messages. Everyday people are inundated with advertisements, and they don't care about a state rep district. They don't. They barely care about a gubernatorial race, and they should, but they don't. And so if you think they're going to read all your stuff and memorize everything you have to say and go take it, it's just not how voters vote. It's not how voters operate. You've got to have one consistent narrative that you say for, at this point, 13 months, over and over and over. It might be the 1,000th time you say it, but it's probably going to be the first time that voter hears it. You need to be as consistent as possible. And so again, kudos to HRO. They have gotten so much better at putting out messages. All those things I read poll incredibly well, but that doesn't mean you say all of them all the time, over and over, and bury people in, poll tested language. Pick a lane, stick with that lane, go run with it to victory on election day. That's the advice I give you as a messaging expert. Take it or leave it. It's up to you. All right, last thing here. We're going to do this quickly, but we had one of our best viewers and listeners who sent this question in, and I promised them we would talk about it. So, Chris, they were especially interested in your thoughts on this topic. The question was this: with the law that was passed, the Katie Stewart Protection Act of last election, where now political parties cannot slate candidates after the primary is over, with that in place, does that increase the potential for corruption? Does that increase a situation where, let's say, a very wealthy individual like the governor or a wealthy political party or labor unions that just got money coming out the wazoo, does that incentivize them to say, you know what, so-and-so candidate on the Republican side in a district that, we'd rather not have to spend some money in, here's $1 million, go away? Does that create that opportunity that maybe didn't exist before? Because before you get the candidate out, the Republicans just slate somebody else. But now, because Republicans can't slate somebody, does it potentially create an opportunity for corruption now, where games could be played on candidate filings? I think it's an interesting thought. Curious if you guys have had any thoughts on that.
Since I'm assuming it was my thoughts who were wanted and not the senators on this particular topic.
Yeah, sorry, Jackowiak.
Yeah. I am not going to say that such a thing has ever happened. I'm not going to claim anybody is guilty of doing anything like that. But if such a thing were to happen, I would say that it is much more likely that such a tactic would be employed to prevent a primary than to prevent a Republican opponent in a general election. So
you're saying likely, but the question is potential. Like, let me give you a straight up example. So we've talked about the fact, let's go up to Kenneally's area, because I want to see if I can engage him on this topic. Up in McHenry County, you've got Craig Wilcox's district, where we've said it, that with Wilcox in it, Democrats have no shot. But if you get Craig out, and put in some other Republican, Democrats actually have a shot at that district because it's been trending against us. So what if you say, they've got that shop up in Woodstock, the governor goes and puts in $1 million order for T-shirts, and there's sort of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and they try to get Craig out of that district. Like, because you can't slate somebody, now Republicans have to do what, a write-in candidate? Like, that you could play games now that there's no slating. It's possible.
I think it'd
be wrong, but it's possible with no slating.
Okay, like this is one of those things that, like, yeah, is empirically possible. But I think you would have to have a really, really pessimistic view on the moral integrity of Republican candidates in order to, like, I don't know why you're obviously name dropping Craig Wilcox like that. I don't think Craig Wilcox should take a payoff. I think Craig Wilcox
not in a million years, which is why I used him, because not in a million years would he
be.
No,
no, but like, think about it this way.
This tactic isn't getting used to pay off Republican elected officials or Republican candidates. It's not.
Let's say
if it's ever being used, it's being used in a primary.
Yeah,
but now with no slating, it could be used. Is the point?
Yeah,
but would you?
But hold on, Chris, let's let Patrick go tomorrow. Like,
Patrick, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, let's say that it worked on one Craig Wilcox, which it never would. He's a fine man of integrity and a really good guy and great senator. But let's say that it did work. Would you want him to be your senator in the first place? Like, if you know what I mean? So like to me, if there's the opportunity to pay somebody off not to run, I wouldn't have wanted that person in the first place, and I just consider that an extra layer of filtration on the political system.
All right. Interesting.
I think also, though, like, maybe not necessarily a payoff, but we've seen before where, candidates have gotten anonymous letters and nasty text messages and things of that nature. I mean, imagine if you're in that last couple days before the filing period, and there's a candidate that they're worried about that has the petitions, they're getting ready to file for state rep or state senator or whatever. You can make that person's life a living hell, and they withdraw from the race, say, "Oh, I'm not doing this. I got 4 people that showed up on my doorstep threatening to kill my kid or whatever." And it's like they back out. Well, it's too late to get the signatures for somebody else, so I guess we're giving them a pass.
Michael, that wasn't what they had sent in to me to discuss, but I think your angle on this is even more logical and potential, because we've already seen it. I mean, the tactics on the left have been getting more and more violent in politics. That's more likely. And frankly, as we get closer to petition filing season, that's the kind of thing I think we actually should keep an eye out for. Because with no slating, you could really screw the Republican Party with something like that.
I think the way the question was framed was kind of creating a problem where it was trying to be too dramatic. It was trying to be too theatrical. It's
a podcast owner wants to get clicks and likes and get people interested. Shocker.
They're backing up a brief, a garbage truck full of briefcases to Chris's front door to stop him from running for comptroller. Like that didn't happen. I wish it did, but it didn't happen. I still work here. I still have to work for a living. So, but no, Butler's actually right here, is that it does make it a lot easier for them to just elbow grease you. You're not getting the carrot, you're getting the stick now. There's no carrot. No carrots for you. You get the stick.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, okay. All right, let's close this down. We always end with a couple segments. We do our news you can use. There's just 3 this week, so it'll be fast, where we give you some info as our audience that you should be aware of. Michael was particularly excited to see this, that the Supreme Court seemed to indicate some favorability towards Mike Bost's challenge when it comes to mail-in ballots. I was kind of surprised by that. I do want to make it clear, for those who don't know, what's before the Supreme Court now is, can Mike Bost actually even sue on this? That's what's before the Supreme Court. If they say he can, then you got to go through a whole nother cycle of lawsuits and everything else, and maybe then it gets back before the Supreme Court where they'll actually hear about the mail-in ballots themselves. But it does look like they're going to give Bost and the other people that are part of the suit the ability to sue on late arriving mail-in ballots and have that litigated in the courts, which, you know what, let's have the discussion. So Michael, I know you were pretty excited about this.
Yeah, I mean, what this is specifically about is those vote-by-mail ballots that come in after Election Day that have not been postmarked. So if you've been to, the county clerk's office, as a poll watcher, as an election judge watching these, the state law says that it has to be postmarked by Election Day. So if somebody, if Election Day is November 3rd and somebody puts it in the mail on November 4th, that should not be counted.
And then, just to be clear, right now that is not counted. What this is about is the ones that arrive after Election Day. That's what the lawsuit's about.
Arrive after Election Day without a postmark. So if it's just
I don't believe it's without a postmark, but let's look that up. I might be wrong, but I don't believe that's the case. But either way, the frustration for Republicans is because we're so horrible at vote by mail, the frustration is we're winning on election night, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, the numbers dwindle until suddenly, magically, the Democrats have won. I'll be clear, it's because they're kicking our butts on vote by mail. That's why it happens. But what this lawsuit is about is not even letting those votes be counted. Basically, if you want your vote to be counted, the ballot has to be in the hands of the election authority on election day. That's the point. I believe that's the point of what Bost in this lawsuit is pushing forward. And you know what? Let's have the discussion. Let's have the conversation. I'll be real politically. If somehow the Supreme Court were to rule in favor of that, it would be a massive boon to Republicans because we are so awful at vote by mail. All right, let me go to the next one here. This is a bit of good news. So good news to Illinois. Lane's going to bring up on screen this graphic that you'll see if you're watching this in post, that Illinois is no longer second highest in corporate income tax rates. Congratulations. I mean, we're third highest, but we went down one in the rankings. The reality is we were always third. It was New Jersey, Minnesota, and then us. For some reason, last year they reported that we were second. But hey, you know what? Good news is good news. JB Pritzker, congratulations. We're no longer the second highest corporate taxes in the whole country. We're the third highest. Well done, Governor. You're doing a great job. A little facetiousness for today, bringing some life to the podcast. All right, last one here. This one just was kind of shocking to me. So there's a school district in the Quad Cities where the superintendent and 2 employees are now facing legal action because they took student vaccine records, put them in a database, and then shared that information, violating student privacy. Now, the school district is contending that that is all allowed because those records, the vaccine records, are not covered. They are not covered by HIPAA or medical privacy laws, and so they are allowed to be shared. So really, that's my focus. Is I don't know the law like Kenneally does or maybe some others, but honestly, that to me, especially with my kid going to be going to school soon, like, you know, what my wife and I decide about vaccines for our child, that's not public information. Like, I understand the school needs to know it. I get it. And if school needs to report the percentage of their kids who are or aren't vaccinated, I get that too. But the specific health records and vaccination records of our kids are not protected under the law currently, at least according to this school district. If that's true, that's a little bit concerning to me. Patrick, I mean, I feel like that should be protected.
Yeah, I would think so too. I don't know that it would be protected under HIPAA generally because HIPAA applies to medical providers, and I don't know that a school is. But you would think that there would be some sort of regulation and/or law, Senator. I'm looking at you, where any sort of public school record would also that has medical information would also be subject to some kind of privacy.
Maybe that's a good idea for some legislation to get drafted. I should draft here.
I mean, again, if true, I mean, again, that's the defense the school district is making. So I'm keeping a close eye on this situation because if that ends up carrying water and they get off on this, then I think there should be a conversation in Springfield. Because again, there's a common sense route here, and I think putting out young kids' vaccination records is probably a bit over the line.
That would
I'm telling my kids not to go to the nurse,
which puts all of us even more at risk.
Right. I think. I'm always looking for peace and moving the state forward. That would be probably a pretty good bipartisan
but
bill.
Sometimes you never know. All right, let's close this down with our final segment here, our OG Clown of the Week. Anybody have anybody you want to give praise to or scorn to from the last week? Jump on in with your thoughts.
I only have praise this week. A few weeks ago, I named our president one of my clowns of the week. But the president is going to be my OG of the week. As of today, Israel and Hamas have signed phase 1 of the ceasefire. And I think Donald Trump deserves credit for that. And if Trump could be the one who gets this done, I think it would, despite everything else that Trump has done, it's going to be in the history books. It would be a really good thing for him and a really good thing for the world. So
I think we all should be cheering on peace in the Middle East. So regardless of political persuasion, we should be hoping that this does work.
Right. So Donald Trump is my OG of the week. And, remember, everybody keep praying for peace in the Middle East.
All right. That's a good one, Chris. Chris coming to life at the end. Anybody else?
We have to give Brandon Johnson Clown of the Week again for his comments about the Civil War, the Confederacy. I don't know why he's on this track. He's been on that for a while where he just kind of says, "Oh yeah, we're comparing, America 2025 to the Civil War," but he seems to think it's working for him.
It's funny, Butler, because his philosophy is actually the same as the Confederacy in the Civil War, because him and Pritzker are like, yeah, sovereignty of states. The federal government has no authority over me. It's like, well, yeah, that was literally the South's argument for slavery. Like, come on, like, what are we doing here, folks?
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance with these politicians nowadays is pretty extreme. All right, I'll go. I got to start with my OG. For those who pay attention, it was my wife's and I 10-year anniversary. And for me to do this podcast, she's in there dealing with our high maintenance terrorist of a child every week. So, baby, I love you, Abby. You're my OG of the week. I'm looking at you that you don't know I'm talking about you. So that's my OG. I got clowns if nobody else has got some. Chris, I'm kind of surprised you didn't bring up Melissa Conyers-Ervin. She's had to settle her ethics case. You just kind of done with that one?
She's so irrelevant in like Chicago politics and like the 7th congressional district race that I just don't really pay attention to her. If like a warm body had ran against her for treasurer in 2023, she would have lost. Like, I don't know everybody was kind of sitting on the sidelines for that one for. I had no authority over it because I decided to turn myself into a Republican against my best interest. So yeah, she's a clown, I guess, but it's not like she's going to be congressman. It's not like she's going to be in office as treasurer much longer. Next election, she's toast.
Yeah. I got, so we always like to call out political violence when we see it, or politicians who are inciting violence. So I'm going to Virginia. Jay Jones, the Democratic nominee for Attorney General. This is just, whatever, your run-of-the-mill statewide candidate in Virginia talking about shooting his political virals, peeing on their graves, hoping their children die as well. Literally, I'm not kidding, look it up. They sent texts. It's a whole thing, and this guy should never, ever be near elected office, ever. So Jay Jones, absolute clown of the week. Let's cut it out with the violent rhetoric. We've got enough violence right now. I want to go to Hakeem Jeffries. So supposedly this government shutdown is about healthcare, and so there was a offer made to Hakeem Jeffries to extend the Obamacare subsidies for a year, and he called that laughable. Which just proves what we've been saying, that they want this shutdown. It's not actually over healthcare. It's not actually over cutting a deal. It's about the political, the optics, the political games. That's what it's about. He was offered, for a short extension of government funding, he was offered a full year extension of Obamacare subsidies, and he said that was laughable. So, this shutdown is not about helping anybody. It's just about politics. Last thing, again, I'm going to go out of state here. Florida's 19th congressional district. You saw Catalina Lauf. Patrick Kenneally, you know that name. Catalina Lauf from McHenry County announced her campaign for Byron Donalds' old congressional district. And in the announcement, you talk about politicians.
In Florida?
In Florida, yeah. Yeah, as did Jim Oberweis and Jack Lombardi. There's a number of former Illinois failed politicians who have moved down to Florida to run for Byron Donalds' seat. But here's the kicker. In her announcement, she talked about how voters are increasingly frustrated with disgraced career politicians and recycled candidates who have already failed the people.
Right. Carpetbaggers.
You are the recycled candidate in the race. But you look at the polling in that race, our friend who's going to be on soon, who sent this over to us, pointed this out, that a poll was done. Jim Oberweis is getting just 7% when the front runner's at 34%, and Kenneally Lauf got nothing in the poll. So she's not even a factor. Neither is Oberweis. But it's just this, I don't know, again, the cognitive dissonance that these politicians will say anything, including sometimes on our side. So Catalina Lauf gets a clown of the week from me as well.
This might have worked like in the 90s or something, but does like Jim Oberweis and Catalina Lauf not know that there's this thing called the internet and people can look you up and see that how many times have they run? A lot. And not in Florida either.
Hey, Oberweis was at least elected to something. That man was a state senator.
Yeah.
He could have rode out being state senator for a while too. I mean, he's the ice cream man. He could have been, Balkema's next door neighbor over there, and they probably would have blown up his district. I'm pretty sure they did. But he could have just rode that out. But no, he wanted to run for Congress.
Yeah.
And for a guy who loves ice cream, I loved his fundraisers.
There you go. All right, let's close it down with our closing thoughts. As always, all of our guests or our panelists get a chance to give their final thoughts. Kenneally, because you were talking sense but annoying me, I'm going to make you go first. Go ahead.
I will just say that I enjoyed being here. I'm good, and the upside to that is that I got under your skin. So I accomplished what I set out to do on this podcast. But it was a joy to be here, and I really appreciate you bringing me on.
Joking aside, I love you, and I'm glad you were here. All right, let's since we're on our guests, Senator Balkema, your final thoughts for the week.
I know I probably said less than some of the other guests, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've known Collin now for over 10 years and been very grateful to see Collin. You just have historically built lesson upon lesson and helped a lot of people along the way. And, all the guests here, I've learned a lot myself on. And so it's a joy to be a part of a group that when you step back and reflect, it just makes sense, and the conversations always are helpful. So I really appreciate being here. I appreciate your leadership throughout the Republican Party, and look forward at the end of the day to turning the state red. I'm not giving up. I think we can do it.
Well, for those who don't know, Senator Balkema is a doer, not a talker. So it's not a surprise that you listened a lot today because that's kind of your thing. But you got kudos for that recently for how hard you work. And there's very few people who work harder than you do. So I want to give you praise for that publicly. If you don't know Senator Balkema, look him up. He's working his tail off. Michael, Chris, I don't know who to give the final word, but I think Michael gets it this week. Chris, go ahead.
So to all the candidates, to all the field directors, volunteer coordinators across the state who listen to this podcast, even the Democrat ones, you can have this one. Get a petition count. You should have been getting petition counts this entire time. You should have been figuring out how many you got, how many you still need, whatever. Make everybody's in the party's life easier for the next couple of weeks and just figure out where you're at. Hopefully you're already done. Hopefully you've already hit your double, your triple, and you're just kind of kicking feet up and letting your volunteers get whatever they can. But you know what? Get your count, hit the doors, put yourself in the best possible position to get on the ballot, and, enjoy the weather. This is perfect walking weather. 65 degrees, sunny. I don't know what it's down by Butler. It's probably still 90 down there. But up here in the Chicago suburbs, it's perfect walking weather. Enjoy the fall, the crisp fall air, the crackle of the leaves under your feet. Go hit those doors. Go get those petitions, and let's everyone get ready to file. Thank you.
All right, Butler, close us out, man.
Hey, get those sheets, get them in, get them to the candidates. If you got some time, just go out and get some more because everybody's stressed out right now about what they've got and what's coming in. Communicate. If you have a page for somebody, tell them you got a page because we don't want to file on the 27th and then you come to us and say, oh, I had 2 more pages for you. And it's like, well, it's too late now. So get them in.
All right, I'll close this down. Thankfully, my cigar this week, I got a few texts about it. I'm smoking an Espada this week, and it's much better. So for those who sent in your concern that I had a crappy cigar last week, I'm better this week. Thank you. And I'll just close with this. The amount of lately whining I've seen in politics has really been driving me crazy, including in my inbox. And listen, whiners don't win campaigns. Whiners don't win in politics. You want to change the laws, you got to win some elections. So you know what? If your feelings were hurt, suck it up. Let's go out there. This is, in many cases, this is a fight for, we see livelihoods and lives, you see, for some of these issues. So suck it up. Let's get out there and let's go win some elections because that's the only way that we are going to change the laws in this state. You can't change the laws if you don't win some elections. So let's go win.